They're coming! They're coming!
Papa! I've seen a fast star! May I open the presents?
Steady on. First, we've been working on a special little Polish surprise with Dina and James. 3, 4.
Przywiezieli do Betlejem pasterze, grają skocznie dzieciąteczku na lizie. Chwała na wysokości, chwała na
Sing alongside, sing.
a pokój na ziemi.
Hello, listening people.
Hello.
Hello, Bartek. How are you?
I'm doing pretty well, Ryan. How are you?
Stop lying.
I'm not doing very well, Ryan. How aren't you?
I am terrible
How aren't
because
you?
I'm not doing that. I'm not telling you what I am doing. I'm just not that.
It's the nature of humanity.
It's the nature of humanity. We have returned after a short hiatus. Bartek, tell them what happened.
We were too tired after watching anime. I mean, that was last week's reason, I guess, but the week
Wow.
before that I was sick.
Bartek's been sick. Still got a bit of a tickly throat. See a doctor, mister. Perhaps if you go to a foreign planet, time will speed up so that your illness will go away. Or it will increase at an alarming rate.
That sounds like
Whichever one.
sounds like a good plot for a film to release in the 70s.
Oh, if only they did release it in the 70s. But Bartek, we are back. We have returned. There was no Polish Lent this time stopping us, but now we are here to talk about a lovely Polish surprise of a movie, because here on Spit and Polish Presents, we are two spitting young gentlemen who both happen to be Polish. We discuss movies that come recommended, and there is a cycle of recommendation, and this time round, it was the listening people's suggestion, and they said, you two Polish men should cover a Polish film. And it took us a while to find a copy with English subtitles, and then suddenly it was everywhere. I couldn't stop tripping over.
I was surprised, yeah.
Tripping over this film in English subtitle versions. There's one on YouTube. There's one on, you said to me off mic, Internet Archive site of some
like
sort.
an archive site, yeah.
There's one on Mubi, like they're everywhere. It's just Canopy.
I remember because
everywhere. I kept tripping over it.
We got this film recommended to us like at the very end of like 2021, and it was always in the back of my mind like I really should like one day just sit down and try to track down a copy, and I just never did. And then, we did Cabaret, and you mentioned, like, we're doing this film finally. It's very available.
Yes, I had a look because I wanted to check out if it was difficult to find. We are doing On the Silver Globe, a Polish film from the late 80s, originally filmed in the 70s, but due to some hijinks that we will, I guess, talk about as we go along, prevented the film's production from finishing it. And I'm sweating thinking about this movie because it's one of those films in which the base level material is already hard to process. But then there's this meta aspect on top of it. But before I even get into all of that hijinks, how about, Bartek, you tell us who recommended this film, why, and a little bit about what is On the Silver Globe.
Yep, so 1989 release. The Polish title is Na Srebrnym Globie, literally on silver and globe, 3 words. So this film was recommended to us by Nick. I've never met Nick, but he's related to someone that I know, and I know his mum, and I was telling his mum, 3 years ago, whenever it was, that I do this podcast, and, we're really keen to do a Polish film at some point. Like, we've only very recently finally done one. And she mentioned that, oh yeah, my son Nick, he watches a lot of European foreign cinema, and I was... I think we've exchanged emails with him at one point, and we were talking about all the Czech films that, he's seen and we've seen. And he wrote me a very big list. It was a small list, but a lot of films were on that very small piece of paper, of Polish films to check out at some point. Some of them with an asterisk recommendation, and this one with a double asterisk. This was the only one with a double asterisk.
Why? Why was there a double, boiling trouble?
I guess this is just the one.
The one. And what is this one about for people who maybe are not connoisseurs of foreign cinema? What would you say to them about On the Silver Globe?
So, On the Silver Globe is an adaptation of a trilogy of books that I think, grandfather of the director wrote. I think it's called the Lunar Trilogy. And I don't know if this is an adaptation of one of them or of all of them. I forget that detail. But it's an adaptation of an early 20th century Polish sci-fi trilogy of novels. And it tells the story of a distant future where three or four astronauts?
There's a lot of astronauts to keep track of, but
where a couple of astronauts have, crash landed on a planet that kind of looks like Earth but isn't, and they have no way of getting home, and so they adapt to life there. They start a little village, and things develop from there. A religion gets created. They die off, and the village continues, and
time speeds up for the children of, but not for the people. It's time dilation weirdness,
and eventually it gets to many decades later where another astronaut comes to the planet and gets embroiled in a war between the village and an indigenous tribe
they
of the planet.
They think of him as their messiah that's come down.
The resurrection, the reincarnation, or the second coming of the Messiah, which is one of the original astronauts there.
Yes.
The old man, the Starepan.
And things are very metaphorical, things are very nonsensical, things are very much about the feeling rather than the logic of it all. And as stated, this film had a lot of production problems, and it opens up telling you that, which was something I did not know anything about. Now, history and relationship-wise, I didn't know a single thing about this movie other than it's Polish and it's really long. I didn't know the genre. I didn't know, when this was made. I didn't know a single thing other than just it's Polish and it's nearly 3 hours long, and that it was difficult to find English subtitles for it. And I would say to everyone out there listening, this is, as we said, easily available. Go check it out for yourself, because I reveled in not knowing anything going in. I had a pleasurable experience watching this unfold in front of me, this mania, this ecstasy, this absolute abstraction, and having the film open up with a narration of the creator, the director, telling you that they murdered his film and what you're going to watch is the best we could do, and that there will be more moments of me, the director, coming in to tell you what this was supposed to be, was just such a jaw-dropping thing, because now there's two films I'm watching. The film that was supposed to be the baseline of, here's my sci-fi epic about, the creation and God and what is it to be alive, and the other film about how me, a filmmaker, struggled to get this made because of the oppressive government stopping me at every turn.
Yeah, we didn't get too many details about that, but it was a lot of, at this point, we would have filmed a scene that went like this kind of thing.
And again, people, if you haven't watched it, get into it, because I'm going to spoil it right now by saying, and the film ends on the note of the meta-narrative creation problem, where we end with the director himself in a reflection of a storefront telling us, this is me. I tried to make this movie and they tried to stop me. I hope you enjoyed it. Bye. So
this is my name. Bye.
This is my name. Bye.
Andrzej Zhalev something.
And I was not expecting that at all. I was hooked even more so, because I didn't know straight away if this was a real thing or if this was just a part of the movie's trickery of we're going to do a cute little meta narrative. But then quickly I'm no, this is real, isn't it? The way this is edited, the way this is done, the Polish government really did fuck these people over for some reason. And again, it's left vague enough. And then you just have to piece together yourself of like, why did this movie get, fucked over by the government? Which government was in charge at the time?
Yeah,
Like, what was
communists run Poland.
Yes.
I believe the quote was like they had a problem with it. I think it was Ministry of Culture had a problem with it because of quote subversiveness or something.
Yes.
Which is very open
to interpretation.
Fluid definition of like subversiveness.
As many controlling regimes like to do with language.
Does it mean like, oh, it's trying something different, or does it mean it's blasphemy?
Yes. What was your relationship with this film going in? Did you have any familiarity with it? Were you aware of anything? And what was your reaction to, I guess, that opening narration of the film telling us something that you wouldn't expect necessarily about like a narrative-driven feature?
So for all the years that I've been aware of the title of this film and that it's a Polish film, I didn't really know much about it. Based on the title, rather than focusing on like, the globe aspect, which I guess would suggest like a science fiction story, I was focused on like the silver aspect. For some reason, I just had this inkling like, oh, is this going to be about like a era of filmmaking or something like that, like the silver screen kind of thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, that wasn't the case. I didn't know too much about it in the years leading, and I can't remember in recent times. I don't know whether we've talked about it or I just did like a little bit of research, but yeah, I did hear the aspect of like this was an unfinished film and it has elements of, the director interjecting in it. So yeah, I was walking into this knowing like, okay, this is going to be, obviously the big comparison point I think that we'll be talking about is like the snowman.
Oh, I laugh because I was telling Rachel, my wife, about the film, and she brought up, imagine if the snowman had the director pop in to tell you how this was supposed to go, and I joked, yeah, and he kept making remarks about how Martin Scorsese wouldn't let him finish the movie.
No, there were many points, especially early on, where I was thinking like, man, what if the snowman would just like have some humility and just do something like this or something like that?
Mine may as well.
Yeah.
You knew that. I didn't know that. Like, I don't
Okay.
think we've talked about that at all. Maybe you've perused over the years. But it was.
I definitely remember a couple of weeks ago sitting down during a quiet moment and like just doing some very light, basic research. So nothing too specific.
I had a good time with On the Silver Globe. It's a challenging movie. It's a very alienating movie. It's abstract. It's bizarre. It's it's confronting. In literally, the characters will look at you and shake the camera and yell at you about existential dread.
Do a bit of monologuing.
Do a bit, only a little bit.
Just a little.
Just a
in the
tad.
2 hours and 44
And
minutes.
horrific imagery of violence or implied violence or the aftermath of violence. I did enjoy this. Now, it did test my patience, as I think it's supposed to. I will say that it's one that in a few years' time I would probably love to revisit because it's both a movie that's very dense and very sparse in its presentation. So my attention wasn't fully on it at times, but it's one of those things in which this is going for a very ethereal, atmospheric bent on telling a story. So that does lend itself to even myself just succumbing to that and kind of being lulled into this kind of sleepy atmosphere to it. Like, I wasn't saying I'm sleepy during it. I was more just like zoning out.
I fully understand what you're saying.
And yet I'm not saying that as like a harsh negative critique. Like, oh, the movie was so poor that I couldn't keep focus on it. It's doing a certain thing that my film brain is not used to consuming, especially for nearly 3 hours. It's obvious to say this because it's what many people like ourselves will say. David Lynch popped into my brain several times during this, especially David Lynch's Dune, because the outfit that the astronauts wear in this are very similar to the outfit that the evil Baron and the Harkonnens wear in Dune. But that's interesting because Dune released before this movie got to release. Very strange.
I'm not familiar with Dune, so I didn't think of Lynch at all.
But I say Lynch because he has that thing, right, where... I say Lynch because he has that reputation in the West of like, oh, he's a big director who makes long, weird, atmospheric, artsy-fartsy movies that test your patience.
Yeah, it's a thing where I'm surprised I didn't think of Lynch. Yeah.
I also thought of Darren Aronofsky, who obviously you know as the filmmaker of Noah. I thought of him as well. Like, he kind of has this fascination with stuff.
Did he do Black Swan as well?
Yeah, he did Black Swan, I'm pretty sure, and Requiem for a Dream, and a few others.
And he owns the rights to Perfect Blue.
Perfect Blue. Or is it just that scene of Perfect Blue? I can't remember if he owns the rights to the whole film.
I think he did do for the whole film.
But I thought of him at times, and also other, like an actual other European filmmakers, like very different. But I was like, oh, maybe at some point in the future, I would recommend the original Solaris as like a companion to this. They're very different, but they're long European takes and sci-fi stories that have rough filmmaking. They like to wander from here to there to there to here. But I had a positive experience, but it's definitely one in which I will raise my hand and say, I'm not going to claim I get it. I don't claim that I get this movie. It's very packed to the gills with cultural things of the time period, just questions of life that I haven't thought of the way that this film's thinking of it, and just sci-fi ideas that tickle my fancy, and ones that are a little left field of my fancy.
You 100% nailed it earlier when you said the word challenging.
Yes. I thought of you during this, and I was like, I think Bartek, when I got to like the 15th monologue of them screaming to the camera, I'm like, I don't think Bartek will love this film, but I'm curious, what did you think?
I certainly didn't love it, but a lot of what you are saying, I did have very similar experiences too, where even though it was kind of draining, very challenging to watch, and I just wasn't getting a lot of it, especially in the latter half, I was never like bored or sleepy, and I never really like turned my eyes away. I just kept wanting to watch it unfold, and I just kept thinking about it, especially that lens of, you know, the making of this film. Like, I was always, you know, yearning for more moments of like, yeah, the director interjecting with more facts about the film. And unfortunately, most of them were about like, you know, this scene would have happened like like this. Like the very first time and the last time we got a lot of like the actual production of the film. Yeah, so it was one where if I am going to watch this again, I do not want to watch it very soon. And in fact, I think I would want to watch it together with you rather than on my own again.
Group experience? We'll bring Reese, our friend, along. He loves artsy-fartsy films.
I mean, a group experience. I mean, to jump to the end of this.
Could you imagine your friend Malloy watching this?
I mean, not even going that far, like just anyone. Like, in terms of like recommending this film, this is one that I think would, like, you'd only recommend it to people looking for a very specific thing. It's not, you know, something it's like, oh, yeah, this is a good time, you know, check this out. It's, this one is more, I guess, the elements of looking into the production of it have to be kind of part of the experience. Like, I can't imagine watching this film and completely ignoring that. Especially when the film itself has the director talking to you
at the start
as the director.
Now, since this is a Polish feature, it's from the 70s.
I speak that language.
Yes.
A bit.
I was wondering what your point of view on this film was, as someone who speaks the language, has a little bit more familiarity with cultural stuff than I do of Poland, and just, you know, your takes on how the film worked in that lens, because we talked about that with the previous one from Desert and Country. Was that its name? I always forget.
In Desert and Wilderness.
In Desert and Wilderness, where that's like a classic Polish story, and I was asking you, why is that?
Yeah, it's a It's based on a book that apparently a lot of school kids read in English class. Oh, not English, Polish class.
And when you look up on the Silver Globe, it's like another, like, this is a big Polish film. It's highly rated, it's highly regarded. The director is of note. Like, I've seen another one of his films, but in English, called Possession with Sam Neill.
Yeah, I did see that he had a bigger film.
Yeah.
Possession.
But what did you? How did you react to this as someone who speaks the language? Like, what was that like? Because I'm reading these subtitles fully. I'm just like, okay, these guys are hamming it up. What did you think of all of that?
There was a bit of a tug of war between me being like, oh, I don't need to read the subtitles, but as is the case with a lot of, Polish that isn't a direct conversation with me, there are words that are said that, I would hear fairly often, but I never actually think about the definition of those words. I usually gather from context or ask, oh, what does that word mean? Sorry. So it was like, oh no, I should be paying attention to the subtitles just so I know like the exact structure. Like I could get like, 80-90% of like every line just fine, but there were the occasional words where I was like, I don't know that word, or this is a word I've never said myself, but I know. So yeah, it was interesting. It's fun, hearing a non-English language and being able to understand partially what's going on. I remember when we were doing the In Desert and Wilderness episode, I pointed out like multiple times where like, the English subtitles didn't really capture the full meaning of this line. There was like this little detail of characterization that it didn't capture. I didn't have any of that for this one, really.
It was pretty straightforward in its like structure of sentences, because these characters, when they're not speaking in existential prose, they're speaking in almost a broken like fashion, because most of the villager people are like feral. They're like Mad Maxian feral weirdos.
Yeah, they straight up talk about how they can't fully understand, the people who are from Earth.
Yes, and so that also adds to like the simplification of things. What do you feel about the Polish landscape and buildings and structures that we see, and how obviously it's from the past before you've ever visited, and I don't know what areas of Poland you've ever
Before
visited,
I was born, yeah.
but they use Poland, the landscape, the ocean, these buildings, all of this as like a representation of a foreign, desolate place.
I actually didn't look into where they filmed. I think maybe a few weeks ago I did, and I think they filmed out of Poland for a lot of it.
Oh, really?
Did
I was
they?
looking up somewhere they filmed in a place called Police.
Police. I actually have a funny story
Yeah,
about that.
so they filmed there for a good portion of it, and then the government shut them down, and then they filmed in another place in Poland. Like, it seemed pretty much like from Wikipedia that it was pretty Poland centric for a lot of the filming of it.
Maybe I'm mixing it up with when I was reading about the director, because like he was out of Poland for a while or something like that.
Oh, yeah, you don't think?
Well, yeah. He did his film with Sam Neill.
Yeah.
Yeah, the with Police, I remember, I think it was the last time I was in Poland or the second last time. I guess Police is not too far from where my dad lives, because we were driving, and you know how you have signs that say like, oh, in this direction, this town, this many kilometers away. I'm in Poland, they speak Polish, and I saw a sign that said police, this many kilometers away, and I turned to my dad, I'm like, hey Dad, why is there a sign that just says police? And he was confused. And he looked at it and he was like, oh, I never considered that this is spelt the same way as the English word police. And that always stuck with me as like a thing of like, when you're bilingual, sometimes you can be so in the mode of one language that you don't think about it from the other side. So, and I guess for our podcast example is, our famous Polish title of Duplex, where the word zniknąć is in the title, and you find it very hilarious, whereas this is a word that I've heard my whole life, but only now that, I'm getting your outsider perspective on how words sound, it actually does sound kind of funny.
Say it again.
Zniknąć.
Which means duplex, right?
It's the noun form of disappear.
There you go. So I reveled in seeing Poland used as a desolate fucking alien
Communist
planet.
Poland.
There's a scene early on in which you see a character like sprawled out in like this muddy water that looks like it's radioactive wasteland, just horrible nightmare world. And I just chuckled to myself and said, they just found a place in Poland and threw that guy in the mud. And they just filmed it, and that's Alien Land.
So you're in you're in kind of the mindscape of like in Borat when they represent Kazakhstan, or like Euro Trip where they go to Bratislava.
Yeah. Or like, for instance, in like the Mad Max movies, how Australia is like a post-apocalyptic land, but in fact it's just like a Victorian highway that they're filmed at, and we drive past that if we go to the country, and like, oh look, there's where Mad Max was.
And the gang's hanging out in like the Melbourne University car park.
Yeah, that's the ticket. But I got a kick out of that. And also, like, I did appreciate the industrial side of things. One of my favorite shots in the movie, I thought it was absolutely hypnotizing, and it almost made me motion sick, is the escalator shot, in which we have
the infinite escalator.
Yeah, the infinite escalator. And I'm like, where the fuck is this? Because it was a long escalator. Like, there's a bit of film trickery, but you can tell, like, the camera is slowly moving up. And yet also it's still, like, there's moments where it's slowly moving, and then it stops.
Oh, I thought it was...
And slowly, like, there's little movements.
Oh, I thought
if
it was
not,
always
it's
still.
handheld, but there is slight movement to it to give the sensation that it's rising and that this escalator is never ending. I really adored that. And just when they would cut back to quote-unquote Earth and civilization, and it's just like, obviously the director and his car sticking the camera out the window and swinging it around.
Like filler stock footage.
But it also, it's like there's a sentimentality to it. It's this primal, raw guerrilla filmmaking where it's just like, it's been a decade of trying to make this movie. Here's what Poland looks like now in comparison to the film itself, where Poland in the rural or wherever else look like that. Like, you can tell, like, the color grading's different. Like, there's just something, I don't know, touching about it in a weird way.
Even though I don't fully get it, it doesn't feel like, just a completely random thing to show. Yeah.
It's weird that it works in favor of a film that's about time, because the film is dealing with a planet and a society and a group and a mentality that's torn apart by the difference of time. Like, these astronauts don't get impacted by the speeding up of time the way the residents of the planet do, if you know what I mean by that. And yet, in the real world of this movie, 90% of the film exists in the past. Like, in the real world, 1970s. And then 10% of it, or less even, is 1980s Poland filmmaking, because now we're allowed to finish it. And it's just that, like, again, this is a film of two films where you have, like, a version of it in which this is the normal film that was supposed to be made, and then the version of it of the filmmaker struggling to make the movie.
So just to fully establish it, were there things shot for this film in the 80s that weren't, like, for the director narration stuff?
Yeah, I think so. I think just some of, like, the filling in of, like, because they talk about it in the movie itself, like, especially in the end of, like, we still had some stuff ready to go and we still had this, and so people came back and we did this and did that. And so portions of this film are like, you can tell it's from the 70s, from the film stock, the camera lenses, the age of the actors, the costumes. And then other parts of it, especially when they're filming in, industrial cityscape Poland, you can tell it's not the 70s. You can tell it's the 80s just by the look of things.
Yeah, like whenever we saw that guy with the long hair, I think he was like a really top-heavy kind of guy. I think that looked very different from the 70s stuff.
Yeah, or the infinite escalator, where look at all those people's outfits and haircuts.
Oh, yeah, all of the shots where the director's talking, I'm pretty sure, that was filmed, that year or the year before.
But isn't that amazing to think about? That it's this harmony of two things happening at once in a movie that's about the weirdness of time. The weirdness of this adult man who's now growing old, and yet he's talking to his great-great-grandchildren who are the same age as he is, or whatever it is. And yet in the film itself, you're watching a film that was made in the 70s, but also in the time it was released, of the 80s. It's just this... It's always interesting when a film has that type of production to it. Like, hence, everyone loved Boyhood.
I was
It took
literally
12
about
years
to mention
make.
Boyhood, yeah.
Yeah, but now tell me a bit more about your experiences and reaction to the film. What were things that you liked, things that you didn't? Any opinions?
In terms of, traditional being engaged with a film story sense, I was quite into that first chunk of the film when it was following, the astronauts and, the ensuing village and culture that was being created. Like, at that point, I was getting the monologues a bit more. I remember one of them had a whole thing about how, now it's been 12 hours since I watched the film, but it was something along the lines of in society we have obligations that we need to fulfill, and so we develop this way. And then when they started having their children on this new planet, and you could see like cultural differences where like the mother was doing like face painting stuff and was going for something new to her, whereas the other guy, not Yarek, that's a later person, Yeje, was he wasn't doing the face painting, and the mother said to him at one point, like, you've never done it, are you gonna do it now? I was getting the sense that, like, oh yeah, they're following on from that earlier monologue where they're now showing like this is what a society without the pre-established Earth culture it looks like, and how it's going to develop into something that will eventually be a little bit more familiar. And
Yes, a lot of what we use as morals or our compass or understanding are constructs that have been built and built and built over generations, and now we're seeing a new generation start, and you even have the mania of it, of his daughter starting to ramble. It's like, you're my daughter, you can't start acting like this, and she's just starting to spiral out. I can't remember if it's her or another woman, but there's that great scene of just this woman walking backwards, screaming about, like, is incest bad? Do I celebrate the birthday in a holy manner for a child, even if they're blind? If someone steals, can I cut off their hands? Like, she's asking all of these questions about, like, how do these things work? And she just screams, I don't know.
And then obviously,
I don't know anymore. And me in the background, there's like this weird little goblin guy with a big long shawl that's black, and he looks like death, and he's just kind of hovering around. And I really like that scene as an extension of what you were just discussing, of like that first, like, let's call it like 40 minutes to even an hour, we're really tackling like that central theme that you were just discussing there in all of these variety of ways, but especially with like that weird family unit of the old man and his daughter and this person and these offshoots. And I really like that as a quandary that the film was dealing with, and using the science fiction of it all to examine it. So the science fiction of this planet that just now has bred all of this life. It started off with one woman giving birth to one baby, and then click of the fingers, now there's a village. You're like, oh shit.
I am the last daughter. It's like, oh, what number? Just the last one.
Yeah, whatever that means. What else about the film leapt out at you, or was really successful?
Well, like I was saying, yeah, that first chunk was where I was very much traditionally engaged with the film. Once it did get to the point of you get the escalator scene and the very, very long description of, like, basically a whole location and set of characters that just don't exist in the film. Like the characters who are watching these video recordings.
Mm-hmm.
Once you get into the plot about, the present day and the new guy coming down, like that's when this film got like really challenging for me.
It's strange because it actually opens with them too. The two modern astronauts and their
Yeah.
sensitive relationship with the indigenous / local lives, and how the temptation of becoming their chosen one messiah and sleeping with them, and there's a bickering relationship between the two, and then we cut back in time. And it's weird because I remember being a bit thrown off by that, of cutting back to the previous astronaut crew, and we're being told, like, this is a previous crew and their ship, and I remember being thrown by that. But then they quickly they quickly grabbed onto the meat of the matter and really got into it. I didn't have as much of a problem in the second half. I did have some laughs about when the director would come in and tell us things. And I was just looking at what we've been given thus far, and I would sit back and say, yeah, how were you going to do that? There's specifically that scene in which main messiah figure in the present day, he's leading the charge against the bird creatures, and he's walking slowly towards them. Then it cuts to the director's footage, and he's telling you, yes, he would have gone in there and he would have killed this one, and the eyeball would have shot out, and then he would have realized there's thousands and thousands of drawers with nothing but their organs and their eyes and this and this. And I was just sitting there going, I don't believe you. Like, for some reason, with all the insane visuals, that one was one where I'm like, I don't believe you would have shown us that. The way you're describing it, I don't believe that. And there was a few instances of that happening where the director would tell us a certain outlandish thing. And I was thinking about, like, with what we've been given in this movie, which has some incredible visuals, I just smiled and went, I don't think you were going to show us this in the way you're saying you are.
I mean, you know, in productions, not everything that you intend ends up happening. I remember
True.
I remember in year 12 when we were studying Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, our teacher found a copy of, like, the script that was used in the production of the film, and there was a scene where, in the description of, like, you know, the visual that's going to be shown, it talks about how what will play now here is the longest shot ever filmed in cinema. And in the actual film, like, that didn't end up happening, but it was like, oh, the intention was there. So in the reality where everything does get filmed, maybe, you know, he would have to make some compromises and, you know, just make the organs implied or something like that.
Oh, yes. There's so much to think about with On the Silver Globe, because you can't take this on a literal story level. It's not interested in that. It's very upfront how uninterested it is in that.
It's very obvious.
You have characters literally take these edible things that make them go into hysterics, and you're like, is this just them high? Are we now dreaming? What's reality? What's time? What's mortality? And that's really what this film is. It's 2.5 hours, nearly 3 hours, of people, various people, good, bad, or in between, wondering why things work the way they work. Characters giving long monologues, often in a state of, like, tears or screaming or on the verge of death even, wondering why things are this way. Why are things like this? Well, are we driven by hatred? Are we driven by love? Are these things even real? Are these constructs just like how Old Man was wondering about the world? What does any of it mean? What's the point of it all? Is there such thing as a messiah? Or are we just building up these individuals of the past to justify our current actions? Like, that's what this film, at least in my eyes, was really coming to grasp. And I don't know how you feel about that stuff. Like, how do you feel about the philosophical and the existential musings that the film is having? Because if you're coming into like, both of us, I think, are pretty on the same page of, like, at a certain point you gave up on, like, a traditional narrative, sci-fi narrative. So what was your overall feelings about it being more of a thesis or a case study of life?
It just kind of felt a bit repetitive to me, to be honest. Like, a lot of the monologues kind of felt like they were saying a lot of the same thing over and over again. I know they weren't literally the same things over and over again, but at some point, it just became a thing of like, I don't know where else to really go with my thinking on this.
Did you have any any thoughts provoked by any of the things that were mentioned though? Like, yes, the reaction of like it's repetitive, but any of those musings that they had, did they spark anything within you? Because I think that's kind of the goal of a film like this.
Well, like I was saying with that first half, where they were musing about how, modern life is, and then showing, them creating a new modern life,
Mm-hmm.
and seeing how, even in trying to do something different to what you're used to, you do come around to sort of the same thing. Like, life will kind of naturally go in a certain direction, and, you get religious stuff happening that's very similar to religions that we have now. There's a crucifixion at one point. There's a messianic character, and in the second half, the main character is treated as being like a second coming of this messianic character.
Mm-hmm. I guess I connected with the second half more than you did. I agree. I mean, obviously the film's too long for us.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
It's no main Hunar, but it's pretty good. But no, I think I connected with the second half a bit more because it was when the shit hit the fan for these concepts. So in the first half, it's very grounded. You're seeing it start to spiral out of control with people wondering like, why do we do it like this? But then in the second half, you have people acting out stuff that we would not find morally acceptable, but they don't care, and they're justifying it through these means. Like when we get back, we have all of these people who are made examples of because they didn't have faith, and they're on these big, what would you call them, like these big poles, these big pillars, and they've been shoved on there, and their entrails
impaled.
Impaled. Yes, they've been impaled on these big spikes, and just the characters,
Vlad the Impaler kind of thing, yeah.
and the characters who have done this using the guise of faith and loyalty and religion as the reason for why they've done this. But our main character, who's been away from all of this, has come back, and he's still holding these our traditional values, and he's like, no, that's not how it works. And I guess I really liked that in the second half, of just seeing the weird hypocrisy of it all, because even our main character, he's willing to do war crimes. He's willing to fight the good fight against these evil alien monsters who, I mean, they were here first, but fuck them, like that type of thing. And even the discussion of like, over time, we become these bird creatures, and so we're killing ourselves, is a discussion point had. Again, this film is not invested in the literal. It's invested in the metaphorical and even the metaphysical at times. And so I guess I like the second half too, because we did get some interpersonal conflict, such as you were talking about the long-haired guy in the more modern-looking sections with the woman, with the wife of the false messiah. I think that's how I read the movie. It was like that guy's wife, who's an actress, which is a big thing too. They hate actors in this movie.
Yeah, they mentioned that a lot.
She and how she has her little revenge plot against this guy, and then it starts to merge the lines of like, which is Earth and which is this planet? Are they different? Are they the same? What's the...
I think all the automobiles are from Earth, yeah.
Yeah, but then that guy walks into the plot of the stuff on the planet. It's very, again, murky and strange, and maybe I don't have all the details right, because again, this film is how do you what are your takes on films that are like an assault to the senses, or a film that just like washes over you with so much stuff. Like, do you appreciate that? Are you resistant to that? Are you accepting? What's your feelings on that?
I do like I do like very subversive things like that, but it's just like if it gets to the point where I kind of lose track, obviously, then that affects the engagement a bit, and it kind of happened for this one.
Mm, I get that. Obviously, I do. There's been films like that for me.
There's been multiple, even on the podcast where it's like, oh yeah, it's ones that I'm like, oh, I want to give this another go now that I kind of know what to expect. Like that was a big thing with Neon Demon, and then we did it on Contrarians, and I got to appreciate it a bit more.
And there's always that thing of like, well, is that the intention? Is to overwhelm the audience to the point of them getting into submission or surrender? Because that is a thing. That is a thing that definitely takes place.
With this one, it just comes back to the whole thing of like the film isn't complete, so that whatever its intentions are, it is compromised. And actually, when the director was describing a lot of the scenes that weren't in the film, I kind of was thinking like, okay, he's describing in a very physical sense, like this is what would have happened next. I was kind of hoping for a little bit more of talking about like the intention behind a lot of the scenes, like this scene would have played out like this would have happened, and it would have been to serve for the purpose of eliciting this emotion, or like for this grander purpose in the overall the narrative of the film.
Yes, but bring him up again. David Lynch doesn't like to tell you that stuff either. For the most part.
For sure. But David Lynch doesn't, come in and like say, "Hello, I'm David Lynch. This is the film I'm making. Now the purpose of this scene is this."
No, but he has characters that exist to do that in his own work. Like, we're going to stop Mulholland Drive so our characters can go to the cinema and watch a weird show that evokes
but that's all narrative and creativity. I'm talking more from like an audio commentary perspective.
Oh yes, but I still think like the argument would be, we don't know this director well enough, but is it not in line for directors who work in this vein to never explain the intention? If this person came in these segments to say, here's what would have happened and here was my intention, I think it would go against the intention of the movie. Because I think the intention of what we've got in the movie is it doesn't know. Because the characters doesn't know. Like, a lot of this is vagaries of life.
If the overall goal of the film was to be very ambiguous and open-ended, then I suppose you would have a point there, yeah.
Because, again, these monologues don't get answers to them. Like, these characters don't get that satisfying, like, now I know what life is and I can live it. No, most of the time they just die in horrible ways or unflattering ways or just very inconsequential ways, never having been fulfilled. And it's kind of, again, this is an incomplete feature. But in the fact that it's incomplete also makes it weirdly complete because, again, it doesn't get to finish itself off, and yet it's about these long discussions that the characters are having with us about things that aren't complete, either like life and knowledge and wisdom and understanding and meaning and mentalities and drive. Like, I don't know. I mean, people sometimes think they've got it figured out, and then most people, we don't know. And that's kind of this film. It's like we literally watch the rise and falls of civilizations who are still in the dark. There's this bit I really liked where they were discussing what would have been shown of like the bird people's like monastery or whatever it is, and
like one of them's like singing on the other side of the room or something.
And they have like these mosaics of like fancy, almost like Catholic type imagery of like them looking down and feeling fanciful and all of that. It's like, but whatever happened to that version of these aliens? Now they're just these creatures, these bottom feeder type thing. And I think that was like an interesting connection of like, it all just keeps coming round and around and around and around and around and around and around. But to what end? Like, this planet will most likely reset and start this process again, because how many times have we seen in this movie that already happen? Now there's a new Messiah guy. Oh, they just killed him. With the old man, he was the Messiah guy. They just stopped listening to him. Because he's not offering what we want. We'll move on and create a new mythology to validate what we want until the next one and the next one and the next one. So, yeah, it's so funny how this podcast works, because I'm saying all of this stuff to you, but when my wife walked in after the movie was done and asked me what did I think about it, I said, it was okay. It didn't really connect with me.
Mm.
And now here we are talking about it. I'm like, I think I actually really like this movie a lot more. That's always the benefit of too. Like, we never record this straight after watching it. It's always a day later. Or
No, yeah, the only time we do that was for the mystery box. Yeah.
Yes, which is a different experience. But yeah, like if I came in right after having watched this, I'd have been like, I don't know, man.
There are some episodes where whether I say it or not, like I walk in being like, I don't know how this one's gonna go.
With the film having been stopped because of these various ill-defined and nebulous but seemingly political reasons, do you have any reading of this movie through that kind of cultural / political lens of this being Polish people trying to make a sci-fi thing that has any kind of pushback or commentary on the oppressive communist government? Because we talked about that with Lemonade Joe, and yet this is a film, it's like, should we even talk about that? Because I'm less in the know on that than you are. Your family came over to Australia because of that stuff, in part, but like, I guess we
part.
yeah, well, yes, but like, we have to talk about it, I guess, because that's like the reason this film took over a decade to get complete. But like, do you think there's any of that actually in here?
I'm honestly not sure, because a lot of it was very vague online. Like the most I got was even though I watched a downloaded copy from that archive website, I did look at the YouTube upload, the one that has like banned film in the title. And I think in the description of it, the person who uploaded it, put a lot of themselves out there and talked about how, they had to track the film down. They had to do like some research about it. They made some sort of statement about like, this is the official stance that the filmmaker or someone, made about the film. And there was some discussion in the comments about like, well, what does that subversiveness mean? And I think one of the comments brought up the subversiveness referred to some sort of commentary that was in the film about opposing authority.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe that's the lens that the film was being criticized for by the culture ministry.
It's also very critical of religious institutions, the film. And Poland is a country where religious institutions
said to be one of the most Catholic countries in all of Europe. Yeah,
this came out during a time in which a Polish person was Pope, correct?
How long? He was Pope for a very long time. When did he start? John Paul II.
Because there was a whole thing where they went through too many popes because they kept getting really old popes that died, and then they said, "Fuck it, we've got to get a younger guy." So they got John Paul II, and then he almost got assassinated, and then they had the Pope Mobile. Like, there's a whole process of like, we went through a bunch of popes, but I think like he was around during the 80s for sure.
Yeah.
So you got to think about like the Polish Ministry of Culture or whatever is going to look at this film that's like, religion is barbaric and repeats itself and maybe has no meaning, and go, you can't be doing that. You can't be doing that. But yeah, I'm not as familiar with Polish history, and I'm not as familiar with the Polish communist occupation side of things. Like, did that end when the USSR dissolved? Like, is that when it ended, or did it end before then? Like, when did like the communists and Russia kind of detract its claws and talons from Poland?
I think it was correlated with the fall of the Berlin Wall. Yeah. I think it was like 91 or something.
Oh, there you go. See, again, it's a side of things that I'm not as familiar with, because my family moved over after World War II because of World War II.
I think I just remember my mum saying, like, oh yeah, it was just a few years before you were born or something.
Yeah.
By the way, John Paul II was Pope from 78 till 2005.
So when this movie was being made.
Yeah, well, was it 70?
77 to 88.
Yeah, so just
89.
about the time.
Yeah, pretty much. But by the time they tried to shut the film down.
Yeah.
The many times. But yeah, I just thought we have to at least brush up on that because I must admit there's so much of the time period, the country, the government stuff that I do not know anything about, but the film still works when you want to think about those things, about like the pushback against authority and institutions and just the rejection of them and how they portray them in this as this cruel, inhuman way. Like there's no sympathetic character in this film. There's not someone you feel for. Like, I'm not going to count characters who are like, oh, that woman gave birth and died. Like, that's not really a character.
In terms of, like, fleshed out characters.
Yeah, in terms of, like, characters that you can identify very well. Like, even the woman, the wife character, she's, like, trying to murder the guy with her car. With the car. Like, there's no, like, nice person that you go, well, poor them. Like, even the old man is, like, a weird guy.
Well, Ryan, what about the director?
Well, he does end the film. And he was my favorite character. Is there much else you want to say about On the Silver Globe?
I think more than anything, and I know that this word is often used as like, you know, a subtextual, you know, damned by fate and praise, but I just come back to it. This film is just interesting. Just overall incredibly interesting. More than anything, I am really interested in the context behind how it is made. Like, you know, as much as you were building up I've got the Polish background, do I have any context? I would like to know a bit more of that as well, and I do kind of wish that we could have a bit more of like a documentary style story about like the making of this film. Just really want to know a bit more about it, because it is all very vague, you know, the whole subversiveness and like what does that mean.
You said at the beginning, and I forgot that they're based on books, correct?
Yeah,
or a book.
The
director's...
the Luna trilogy or something. The director's grandfather made it in like the early 20th century.
But no matter if that's the case or how accurate of an adaptation they are, there is a certain ethereal quality to this that elevates it beyond just sci-fi. There's almost like a folk tale like mentality to how this is portrayed, in which weirdly more than the previous Polish film we've done, I can understand why this is culturally relevant to Poland over and over again. Like if you look it up, this film is a big deal, it's critical, like it's made by a respected filmmaker. It had, you know, it went through adversities to get made. But even if you strip all of that away, there's just a certain atmospheric, silent storytelling to it that I can see being a great representation of a psyche. It's like when we did, I forget the name of the film, but our good friend Sean recommended it. The animated,
the Son of the White Mare.
Son of the White Mare. Where that is like a folktale story,
yeah.
and we maybe didn't understand all of it, but we kind of got like the general impression of like, oh, I can see how this captures a culture's psyche, and it goes beyond the animation, it goes beyond the fantasy story into this folktale type thing, and that's how I feel about this, where it almost goes, like I said, it goes beyond sci-fi conventions and trappings and pastiche and genre stuff to this other plane of existence that I just, like I said, it's almost like a magical realism, folk tale, just tell this to generations, because that's kind of what it's doing as well, where time is this murky, ill-defined, but malleable thing.
It's like distant future, but it looks so primitive kind of thing.
Yeah. And that's kind of like the last big thing I have to say about On the Silver Globe.
I wonder how prevalent it is in Polish culture as like a, you know, an iconic film, because when I was talking about it with my mum, like she hadn't heard of it. but she hasn't lived in Poland for a long time, so yeah, I don't know.
That's fair. Now, would you recommend on the Silver Globe?
It's like what I was saying before. It just depends on who you are. If this is the type of thing that sounds interesting to you, check it out, and you might have the same experience as us, where we were both challenged by it. We both, kind of struggled with it and don't fully grasp it, but there is just the element of it that is interesting. Like if that's something that you can accept, then yeah, check it out. If you're more into just like a raw film going experience, then yeah, this one won't be for you. It's very long too.
Yes. I always think back to some of the friends we've met along the way during our podcasting experience, and how, like, I've really come to realize that there are people out there who have a very strict rule of how movies should work.
Yeah.
I'll bring him up, but Alex from the Contrarians, he has a strict rule of 90 minutes. If they're over that, then there's problems, blah, 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 and there's exceptions to the rule, blah, 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 blah. And even people that I won't mention by name that we know that are like, I only like movies if they make me happy, or people
black
have
and white is
black
the
and
problem.
white type of, yeah, that's one of like, I don't watch movies in black and white, or
don't watch films with subtitles.
Yes, or dubs as well. There's a lot of rules for people with movies. I have them too. I won't pretend. Like, there's certain types of things that I'm not going to go out of my way for. But this is an example of this movie doesn't give a fuck about your fucking rules that you make. It's going to be nearly 3 hours long. It's going to be jumbled up. It's an incomplete movie, but they're still going to put it out anyway because, by God, it took us over 10 years to make it, so we're putting it out there. It's not going to have one coherent point. It's going to have like 17 slightly coherent points. But in a way, I love that. I love that because this is not a standard fare film. You're not going to be watching this type of film every week. You're not going to be able to talk about this type of film with many people. So if you're wanting to be challenged, if you're wanting something a bit different, if you're wanting something that, heck, spectacle-wise is impressive, then give On the Silver Globe a watch. Like, is the sheer spectacle of the filmmaking is something to behold. We didn't talk about like the technicals of this, but there's so many things that they did here that, like, you could tell, like, primitive guerrilla filmmaking. They're just like doing this, and then there are other moments where you're like, how the hell did they do that? How did they get that shot? Of, like, that's a really, like, as you kept saying, interesting piece of filmmaking or visual style that they've done here. And so I definitely give On the Silver Globe a recommendation. It's for certain type of people, but in a way, that's the appeal.
Yeah.
It's not for everyone. Like, I can't imagine our friend Alex ever watching this and not just bitching and moaning. He couldn't even handle Om Shanti Om. He was like, the story could have been told in 20 minutes. I'm like, 20 minutes, mate? Come on. But, Bartek, it is your time to shine and recommend a film for the next discussion. So, what are you going to hit us up with?
Let me just get it up. So this is a film that I've had on my mind for a while. It's not a grand big film or anything like that. I actually haven't seen it. It's an Australian film from 2012. It's called Any Questions for Ben?
I know the name. Is that the one with Josh Lawson?
Yeah.
Okay. I haven't seen it either, but it seems like here's how I'll say it. It seems like a film Rachel would have recommended to me in the first year of our relationship. She had a few of those films where it's like, hey, have you seen this?
Yeah.
It's Aussie.
It's one that I have a slight history with it, despite not having seen it. And I remember mentioning it every now and then. It's like, hey, have you ever heard of this film, Any Questions for Ben? I remember distinctly, like, in, I think, our first year of uni, I heard it brought up in one of our classes. And some people who had seen it like, oh yeah, it was pretty good. I'm like, oh, okay, maybe I should, check it out at some point relating to the history I have with it.
Sure, I can't wait to give it a viewing. Yeah, I don't recall having seen this. I know the name. I know Josh Lawson. He was up and coming actor during my youth, and he has gone off to America to do a few projects.
Our friend Liam, who's been on the podcast twice, did a scene with him on what's that show called? Thank God You're Here.
Thank God You're Here. Yes, that's
I
right.
remember when he was our teacher for our improv class, he told a very funny story about like a look that he gave him during one of the scenes, and that was really funny.
Well, we will talk about our good friend Josh Lawson and more about him and the movie next time on the pod.
And some guy he knows called Liam.
And some guy he knows called Liam. Liam spelled with 2 L's because it's Welsh. Why do I know that? Tune in next time, and maybe you'll hear the story.
And I'll tell the same story because we were in separate classes, but we had the exact same experience.
Yes. Weird, isn't it?
Yeah, it's funny.
Let's get Liam on as a guest again. We haven't had him in a few years.
He can call Josh during
He can call Josh during it, and Josh can be like, I have questions for Ben.
You were Ben, I think.
You were Ben. Do you have any questions for him? But thank you all so much for listening. It's been a pleasure to sit here and chat about a film yet again. You can contact us through our social medias or our email. We are on Facebook and Twitter under Spit and Polish Presents, and we have our email address, spitandpolished@gmail.com, in which you can chat to us, recommend films. We add them to our list, and we eventually get around to them. If we can find a copy of them, especially, it makes it easier. There's a few that we still have to source where we can watch them, and or the versions that we can watch with English subtitles, whatever.
And we have to put some of Nick's other Polish film recommendations on the list now.
Now you have to shuffle them into the list and see if we can find them.
By the way, thank you, Nick.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Bartek, for being well enough, slightly, to be here for the podcast.
I didn't cough as much as I thought I would.
I'll edit some of them out, but I'll put them all in the back half. Like as this episode ends, it's the cough cut.
Cough cut. Me saying excuse me.
Yes,
repeating my line.
The cough cut is Kafka's brother.
Speaking of which, everyone, we always tell you to contact us. We've actually had a couple of Facebook messages in recent weeks.
People like how I say Bartek.
Yeah, I read that one. Yeah, I did. I saw that yesterday. I'm like, I didn't get a notification for this one.
Yes, I was chatting. We got a Paul Giamatti recommendation.
Yeah, we
so
did.
Gonna add that to the
I'm
list.
distraught at the one that got deleted.
Oh, I'm so distraught as well.
Because you were having the conversation with the guy.
We had a conversation with a random...
I was laughing so hard, and I'm so sad that I can't read it.
I blocked them, I'm sorry.
Oh, okay.
It got to this point where they were just being weirdly insulting, and I'm like, I'm done. I spent 4 days talking about this. We had a Facebook conversation that went in circles. They were like, do you have a Facebook page? I'm like, you are in fact talking to us through our Facebook page.
You've liked posts on our Facebook page.
This isn't a Facebook page. Are you lying to me? And I'm like, what do you want, mate?
Well, but Ryan, do we have a flyer?
Did we have a flyer? And then I just showed them the cover photo, and they're like, that's not it. And then they showed me a picture of a cover photo for a Facebook page. I'm like, that's a cover photo for a Facebook page. That's not. And then I said, that's not. It's just a whole circle of nonsense. But enough behind the scenes dramas. Let's get on out of here. Thank you so much, listening people. Remember to be kind to each other, or you won't get a lovely Polish surprise.
Just use that as the cold open of this. And cold end. Anytime we do a Polish film, you're not going to use Polish dialogue. Just put the Polish surprise.